Game data.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to another episode of the Game Data Podcast. Today on the podcast, I talk with Matt and Gabriel of SomaSim Games about their industrial simulation strategy game, Rise of Industry 2. We talk about video game architecture. We talk about the history of SomaSim and creating strategy games. We dive into game architecture centered around a custom scripting language and data definition file. It's the kind of stuff we really like to get into on Game Data. But you know what? I do want to apologize in this episode that I realized after recording that I was recording my audio on my webcam, not my actual podcast mic. So I have to say that I'm sorry that the audio for this is not going to be as good as I try to make it for Game Data. So I do apologize in advance. That said, the conversation with Matt and Gabriel is still super awesome, and I'm really glad that they took the time to talk to me. So sit back, relax, and enjoy the show.
Game data.
Matt and Gabriel, welcome to Game Data. Happy to have you all. How are you all doing today?
Doing great. Hi. Glad to be here.
Before we get into it, I would love to hear just a little bit about SomaSim Games as a company, both of yours roles in the company and kind of what you both do, before we kind of dive into talking about Rise of Industry 2.
I'll give it a start. My name is Matthew Viglione. I'm the co-founder and lead designer at SomaSim. We started the studio in 2013 with my partner and then co-founder Robert Zubek. Then we went on and made 1849, which is the game about building gold mining towns during the California Gold Rush. Then we made Project High Rise, which is a skyscraper simulation game. Then City of Gangsters, which is about prohibition and running a crime empire in the U.S. In the 20s. And then we made Rise of Industry, which we'll get into a little bit later. During the process of development of City of Gangsters, toward the end, Gabriel joined us as a newly graduated junior programmer. Then during the Rise of Industry, my partner had a chance to go do artificial intelligence for a large game company, which he couldn't pass up. So Gabriel, having been here and been intimately involved in the project, stepped up and took over for Rise of Industry 2 as our tech lead. So I'll let Gabriel say a little bit more about what he does.
Yeah, so my name is Gabriel Firmo. I almost don't need to do an intro. That pretty much covers it. But yeah, I've been with SomaSim now, I think 4 years, possibly slightly less. And I came on during the pre-release run-up to City of Gangsters, just out of college, as kind of a hired hand. Like I did a little bit of whatever needed to get done to land that game. And over the course of the post-release of that game and the beginning of the architecturing on Rise of Industry 2, gradually became like more and more involved in core architecture. And then eventually Rob had to go and left the hot potato in my hands. So now I'm tech lead.
When you say had to go, it sounds like you often.
Yeah. Well, we had a lot of, it's just really City of Gangsters style. You're like, oh, we had to take care of him.
He had to go.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, one thing, I'm excited to talk to you guys about Rise of Industry 2, but I also think, like, we were talking before the podcast that SomaSim has sort of been doing, like, simulation strategy games now on Steam primarily, as far as I know, for almost like a decade now, which is, like, I mean, crazy. Most indie studios don't, like, ship more than once. You all have been doing it, ship 5, 6, like, kind of major strategy titles. I remember seeing 1849 because there's been a few more since then, but it was also kind of the first like modern Impressions style like city building game, like inspired by things like Poseidon in the past. And there's been a few since then, but that was one of the first ones where, I don't know, maybe it put you guys on the map, so to speak. I think the game did pretty well. And then you kind of like took another zag into my childhood into Project High Rise, like as a big like sim tower person. I definitely played a lot of that game too. And so it felt like you nailed it. I don't know if you want to talk a little bit about the journey of kind of SomaSim and like, I guess why you started it and then why this type of game. And also like the games you make, right? You're not making like Civilization 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. You're sort of making like niche strategy games, but that are like different, kind of release to release, right? Like Rise of Industry is obviously more like, Rise of Industry 1, but also the kind of factory-driven strategy games. 1849 is like an impressions game. Project High Rise is like Sim Tower. All those games are sort of like kind of asymmetric. Like they're similar, but they're also kind of like perpendicular in ways where there are like very different spikes into strategy. And I'm wondering, like, how are you choosing what's next? How are you choosing like what to focus on? And then maybe we can talk about kind of like how Rise of Industry 2 came to be as that next choice for you all.
Sure. I mean, basically, like as you alluded, we're probably not that far off in age. I am mining my childhood, my late adolescence and development in this process. Like, I very much liked, I was very into Sim Tower. Like, I spent a lot of time playing Sim Tower, getting very frustrated as I saw people turn red going across, waiting for an elevator, like being excited to get a sky lobby finally done. And when we started the studio in 2013, we were very much like and we still to a degree are sort of a scrappy indie team. And we looked at the amount of money that we had, and it was just going to be Rob and I with another friend from Rob's time at Zynga and an art contractor. So that was sort of the lean team we had to make 1840 that we had before we started making 1849. And we looked at sort of the amount of funding, runway that we had in the bank to make a game. We were like, oh, we can do like 13 months. And then we looked at like a quick swag, like a stupid wild ass guess of what we thought it would take to make Project High Rise. And we were like, oh, that looks like 2 years. And so like then you inflate.
And like a lot of art, right?
Yeah. And so
1849 is nice because you make one sprite, you drop it down. You're like, cool, that's good.
So we were actually driving, like, as we were thinking about what we were going to make, because we were like, well, we can't make the Sim Tower like game in the time that we have, at least not well. And as a designer, I'm like, if I can't make it well, I'm not doing it. And so as we were driving back from some friends' family who live halfway up to Lake Tahoe in the foothills in gold country, and as we're driving back, like, we started having a conversation about there used to be a whole bunch of gold pounds here that just sprung up and then went away. Like how ephemeral it was, and how, like, the story about how the people who made money during the gold rush weren't really the miners, it was everybody else. And the towns that the miners lived in are all gone, but the towns that were built by like everybody else are still there in Northern California. So we're like, there's a game there. And so we made 1849 sort of based on that trip coming back from Thanksgiving. And luckily it did well enough for us to be able to then make the game that we wanted to make out of the gate, the Sim Tower homage that became Project High Rise.
Because you guys were sort of early to like what has become what I would say like kind of like the like bread and butter ish of like what does well on Steam. Like you were never making like 2D platformers or things that were like could do well on other platforms. Like Steam is really sort of a place that has bared out to be a really good platform for making like strategy games and distributing strategy games. And so landing there first initially, I think, has helped you. 10 years ago on Steam, like that was pre-Steam Greenlight, right?
Okay.
Like that's like a very early on the Steam. And so you have a strong first mover advantage. And not only that, but you're making like, it's like you all and Firaxis, right? And like, like maybe I can think of a handful of the other people that are like working, but it's like you're doing the stuff that does well on Steam kind of before there's been the deluge of people coming in now where, anybody can release on Steam, which I think puts you in probably a good position.
And with High Rise, we just got lucky. Like I kept waiting for I'm like, somebody's gonna beat us to it. Somebody's gonna beat us to it. Somebody's gonna beat us to it, and no one did.
Yeah.
I had a weird conversation with somebody from Paradox once at GDC where they mentioned like, oh yeah, we're working on a skyscraper simulation game. I'm like, oh, interesting. But we beat them to it by like a while, and then I never heard them mentioned again. So like, I may have killed a Paradox project, and that makes me happy. I love Paradox games, mind you, but it just gives me a little bit of joy. But yeah, that's sort of how we got in. And then City of Gangsters was living in Chicago after we moved back to Chicago after 1849. Just being back here, we were like, there's not been a good Prohibition game in a lot, like kind of ever. And like all of the like, Al Capone's bookkeeper and like the whole business empire of running a crime and Prohibition. That's sort of what drove us on from there. So yeah, that's sort of how we got through the end of City of Gangsters.
Just to start dipping into some of the game data stuff, right? You've been using the same tech since then. Like I know Rise of Industry 2 is Unity. Can you sort of paint me a picture of like the sort of stack, so to speak, and how it's kind of evolved up to where we're at now?
1849 was an action script, so it was a Flash game.
Oh wow, nice. Did you guys use like Flixel and like stuff like that, or was it just like pure action script?
Pure action script.
Oh, just straight up Flash.
Yeah, we'll jump ahead.
Wow.
Like, you've seen our sim files, our data files, like
Yeah.
that sort of structure of how of how SomaSim game is built goes back to 1849. Because
Oh,
again,
wow.
it's pure action script, data driven. Then we switched to Unity for high-rise because Flash, and a lot of the core stuff that is in City of Gangsters and Rise of Industry 2 has its origin back then. Rise of Industry lacks the prologue integrations that Project High Rise and City of Gangsters had, because it's not
You
that
mean
deep
like
of a social
prologue is
sim.
like the language? Like
Yeah.
prologue? Oh my god.
Yeah, we have some paper. There were some papers that we wrote for a few conferences that I can send you the link to after, where we
Oh wow.
talk about what we
Yeah.
did, what we have rocked with logic programming. It's
So I guess there was like why would go ahead, Gabriel.
No, sorry. I was going to say I can't speak to 1849, but it is the experience of working on the code base nowadays is there's a little bit of it that is archaeological, because there are elements that really are from all the way from High Rise that have made it to Rise of Industry practically untouched. This is owing a lot to Rob, my predecessor, has a very strong. I mean, this is the first thing that I learned under him when I came here. Is had a very strong vision of particularly the model and the organization of how a core architecture should work. And so, despite the facts that you can kind of track certain files' age by the stylistic, like, variable naming conventions and some particular usages of initializing and teardowns, you can see that they're filled differently, but the actual core structure of everything is as old as those games. I mean, the game service and context kind of sets up in the exact same order and initializes the exact same managers. The philosophy is really surprisingly stable. I mean, even just watching the transition from City of Gangsters to Rise of Industry 2 in real time, despite these being like vastly different games, it was surprising how much of Rob's core architectural philosophy being so consistent allowed us to salvage whole swaths of files completely and have them be perfectly suited to the new direction with only minor modifications. Yeah.
Because you mentioned there's sort of a consistent architecture, but it's not like you're not literally like copy pasting the like Project High Rise project over and like starting Rise of Industry 2 in there. It's more you're still starting, I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, you're starting from more of like a blank slate and then you're kind of incrementally bringing stuff over, or is there actually kind of like, can you open up the editor for Industry 2 and then like, open the High Rise scene? Is it like, is it actually separated?
Not the project, but there is a good amount of the code that has come over wholesale.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, we have whole slews of internal libraries that are not game specific. That those have obviously come over. They're just our tool sets. But also in terms of core architecture, like if I went and did a just a diff from our core session context file from Rise of Industry 2 to City of Gangsters to High Rise, I would be surprised if there's more than 100 line changes across those 10 years of development in that file, because it's admittedly not our most complex file, but it is the base organization for how the simulation is organized, and that has been profoundly stable to the point where we can bring over just straight up copy and paste the file when we start a new project with it.
I mean, let's just like start with there. So you mentioned this like sort of core architecture. Do you want to like broadly describe kind of the architectural pattern that you're using? Or at least, I don't know if you started it on 1849 and kind of improved it over time, or like High Rise is when it started. But I don't know if you want to speak a little bit to like how the games are organized from like a actual like coding standpoint.
Yeah. So it is.
You don't have to tell me like class names.
No, sorry. I'm just looking up the file to help organize my brain. So one of the things that's really fascinating about SomaSim's workflow that kind of has become a bit of a running joke in our the shared work office we share an office with several other companies is a little bit that we are a bit unusual in the sense that we are a Unity studio technically. We use Unity for rendering, and obviously we use a whole lot of the Unity API for game objects and all that stuff. But largely, from a simulation standpoint, we have our entire game separated from Unity. We receive a couple of tick timings and a couple of events from Unity to obviously help the two run in tandem, but we largely don't use a whole lot of Unity objects, barring these really bare bones objects that are often just holders for a model. Our UI does make more use of it, but broadly our game board, if you look at it, it is a weird graveyard of complex Unity objects. It's a lot of singleton basic model holders, which is to say, the majority of our core architecture is extremely simple. The basic game is divided into two overarching managers, the session context and the service context. The service context is the maestro of anything that is outside of the actual game session. So like your main menu, for example, your options menu, the menus that are not like in-game per se. Your camera, you may need that outside of game, all kinds of stuff with platforms, all kinds of stuff with, if we ever had any integration with the internet, which we've sometimes used for announcements, all that stuff is in the service. And then you have the session context, which is actually where the meat of, the game is, like where the actual simulation exists. And the session context gets spun up when we actually start running a save file, and that contains a number of sub-managers, each one being in charge of different systems. So it is really this like orchestra with two maestros. The service context making it so that all the stuff with inputs and all the more technical elements outside of the fiction of the game work, and then the session context that is the entire fiction made manifest.
And are you like, words like context makes you think of things like dependency injection. Like, is that like, are you passing context like down through like other systems that are being used and they're kind of like managing it? Or is it more like, is it immutable? Like, I guess how is context being written and updated? Is it just like a plain struct and you have like functions that just operate on it? I'm drilling in on this. I know like even for game data, this can be a little bit technical, but like there are a lot of ways to like do simulation. Like just to reference a past episode, like this, when we talked to the people at League of Geeks who were doing Solio Infernum, they had sort of a similar thing where they basically fully wrote their simulation state as like a separate C# program. And they basically just like linked into it through like a DLL. It wasn't even part of Unity. Unity also itself has like something like DOTS, which is like a kind of people who are doing large scale simulation games. Like I think 2 Point Studios, it does like 2 Point Museum and 2 Point Hospital. They use like DOTS a lot. It sounds like you all are doing sort of neither of those, but you are writing C# code in a way inside of Unity that you just have like C# objects. They're not throwing around like game objects and stuff and like kind of tracking them as part of your simulation. It's more that you have a shim onto some data that you're operating on as part of this like session context manager.
No, yeah, we are not really handling Unity game objects very often. In fact, in our code, you will find that most often when we do grab a Unity game object outside of the UI, we're most often just referring to it as a model, because that's almost certainly what it is. We have our
like a 3D model or like a data model?
Yes, as a 3D model. Yes, that is largely what we're using it for. And we actually have our own kind of parallel object system, which is our entity system. And our entities are kind of, parallel to Unity objects in the sense that they're kind of the atomic measurement of our game. Everything is entities. And these entities are split into a config, a component, and a data. So every entity will have a list of config subclasses that basically refer to the many different kinds of object that can exist in the game and what kinds of scripting data they may need when they get set up. The component, which is one-to-one for every kind of config object. There is a component object, which is basically like, given this config, here's all the things this entity can do. And then the data just is where we store runtime stuff relevant to those first two. So you can often describe, in kind of a way that is a little bit similar to Unity, you can describe any thing that exists in the game via this entity, which components are initialized in it. So if an entity has a building component that is initialized, that meaning it has an building config that is non-null, a building component that is non-null, and a building data that is non-null, then it is likely a building. But if it has an industry component also initialized, we say it's probably an industry building. And then you can create this mosaic of which things are null and which are non-null to create this really, really variable kind of compositional approach to objects, where something can be any list of things so long as it has that initialized in its config.
Gotcha. And then like you're using the word entity, so I'm obviously thinking of like ECS and like, but you're not necessarily describing that, because it sort of sounds like you're describing entities that are themselves almost polymorphic. It sounds like they can have certain components that have data, but it's not an ECS in the sense where you have an entity that's like basically an integer ID, and then it has like components that then get operated on by systems. This is more like, it's like something like an actor model, but it's more described in terms of like an entity component arrangement. Is that like roughly correct? Because it sounds like, I guess, why would there ever be two separate entities? Like from what you're telling me, it sounds like you could have an entity and then you could have like 80 different components, then 80 different configs. And that would encompass like all possible things that could be in the game. Why would you need two separate entities?
So an entity refers to like a single object, which is to say like a building in the game is one entity. So they are ID'd actually, as you were describing. Each unique object on the board has an entity ID, which will take you to its packet. And when I say that it can have a bunch of different components, to be clear, you cannot have multiple building components on one entity.
Sure.
For example, they're actually very, very analog to the Unity component system. It's just like a thing that this object can do, but we also use it as an identifier, where if you have this thing, then you are that kind of object.
Do these components themselves actually map to like monobehavior components in Unity, and you kind of like do some data binding, or are they purely inside your own system?
Purely inside our own system.
And so is the behavior being authored as like data, or is it actually authored as like when you say something has a component, where is that has relationship being kind of defined? Like maybe we can talk about SIM files, because I imagine that's sort of the answer here.
Yeah, so I'll hand off to Matt, who is our SIM file czar.
I'll set a little just a preamble to this. I was like, before I interview people, if they have a game up, I like to just decompile it, poke around in the data and see what's there. And I opened up Rise of Industry 2, and I saw there's a folder called Entities, and inside of that are a lot of really juicy game data flavored things, which is that there are a lot of these like .sim files, which you can just open up in a text editor. And there's one called like, I don't know, buildings is actually empty. But there's like consumer.sim, and then it's, I can't recognize this language off the top of my head, or even if it's a language or just their own thing, but it looks like a sort of a data description format that is like maybe also serialized from somewhere else, or like it's sort of hard to tell if they're typing it, but clearly this is where business is happening. And so I imagine there's some binding here back to Unity maybe, but also this is pointing at some other tool that I don't see that they used to author these. So Matt, if you want to tell me all about SomaSim sim files, love to hear it.
The authoring is me in Sublime Text. Like everything that you see in entities.sim, I wrote that all by hand. Like that's okay. So it's tens of thousands of lines.
Do you enjoy pain? Is that the...
No, I am that much of a control freak. When it comes to like authoring things, as a designer, I feel like I need to be fully immersed in the game design. Like I need to know like what every value does, where everything points, what every config is. Like it needs to all be in RAM for me to be able to like sort of make this kind of immersive simulation game happen, so that like if somebody suggests, well, what if we change the value of this one thing, I can just like, yeah, that'll work, or like, oh no, that's going to create a whole bunch of problems, we don't want to mess with that value. So like the way that they're structured, like you were looking in the consumer file, so that's consumer.sim is where we have all of the things that are like a consumer based industry, so appliance factories, microchip factories, computer factories. And then again, like as Gabriel was mentioning, there's a building component which gives you like the basic information about the building, like what's its name, what type of thing it is, what are some rules about where it can appear, where it can't appear, what are some requirements for it to be constructed in the first place. There's a board component which tells you like, oh, it's this big by this big, this is how much it costs, how long does it take to build. Rise of Industry is a game of complexes, so there's a whole bunch of another section about how it fits into its complex as a whole. There's another section about just its models, like what game objects does it need to show up on the game board. And then there are a couple others that are sort of like, the industry one, but tells you it needs, 3 units of copper, 2 units of wire, 3 of plastic, 3 of glass to make 4 appliances. Does it produce any waste, stuff like that? So all of those things are configurable in a sim file. And they can be sort of cross-referenced too. So like normally, if a building is a mine, then it has an extractor component, which tells you how much does it pull out of the ground, what kind of deposit does it need to be on to do that, what's its rate, what else does it produce in terms of byproducts. But like if you wanted to, you could have a appliance factory that also mines coal. If we just slide that coal mining component for extraction into the factory, it'll start looking for a coal deposit. In fact, it won't let you place it on something that's not a coal deposit because it's like, I need to extract coal. And so like I've done that a few times when I've gone sort of feral in my scripting. I'm just going to put that in there and see what happens. And 98% of the time, it does exactly what I think it's going to do. Like, oh yeah, and now the appliance factory wants to mine coal. That's undesirable. Or, I decided at some point the oil well should probably produce natural gas every so often as a byproduct. So I just slapped an industry component in there. So then every 10 days it produces natural gas. So it really gives us a lot of flexibility to, like, as I'm designing things, to be able to like put new components in, take other components out as we're building the simulation. So like I have all of the elements of the simulation in those sim files, and that goes for settings. Like we build all the content there too, so all of the contracts that are in the game, all of the companies, all of the quests and missions and things like that, they're all there. You don't even need to decompile the game. If you get it from Steam, it's all in the streaming assets folder, so they're all just there. And also then it makes the game really easy for players to mod and change if they want, because it's all there.
To give a notion of the scope of Simlang and our sim files and how much of the game is in there. If you were to delete all of our sim files, obviously, game wouldn't run, but in terms of like what data would exist, what things would still be described in the video game, the remaining objects that would be fully described in the video game is our UI. Those are entirely in Unity. Our terrain, which is entirely in Unity. And I believe that is it. Like technically our game models would still be in there, but they would have no,
they'd be homeless.
Yeah, we would have no way, like nothing would reference those objects. Like if you look into our game right now and you look at our scenes do not have any references to any prefabs or objects that exist. They would go totally homeless without our sim files. So that is to say, the entire meat of the game, every data, every config, every single object that exists in the game exists in the sim files first.
I'm looking at these, like there's some, Matt, are you the only one that's like authoring these such that like on line 4 of waste.sim, I see ident, which I assume is identity. And there's an open brace and it says template, admin-base-waste, and there's parent, and it says admin-base. I would have no idea. Though that's all effectively a magic string to me. Like, is that just you have your own sort of internal reference of what that needs to be, and you kind of plop that on every one of them? Or the other things, like in that same section, building has something called ribbon image, and then it's in quotes looks like a path. It says UI images /build/rcranes01. You're just like, that's some path somewhere? Like, I guess, how are you talking about
Correct.
how you're actually authoring these, right? Like, I understand sort of like give this thing this behavior, but there is clearly some other sort of scaffolding and ways these operate where there's some interop that I'm interested in kind of how you actually author these.
Sure, like the identity, that's going to be the actual entity's name, and then the parent is just going to be its parent template from which its child. So like when we're describing, like the building has various the game has various central offices, and like all of the central offices for like heavy industry. So all of the furnaces, blast furnaces, the heavy duty industry, like they all share a common set of things, a common color palette. They all have the same ground footprint size. So we can abstract a bunch of things up to the parent class. So then that parent will be like admin building heavy industry. And then like the individual like copper foundry has, or like a smelting complex will then refer up to that one. And so we can abstract a bunch of things up top so that we can be more, it's just a way to be less verbose in our scripting. So we can put all of the shared components further up. So, then all the metal smelters will share largely similar footprints, largely similar byproduct, like how much waste they produce. Their hookups will be in the same places. They'll need similar amounts of utilities. So that can all be in a parent class. And then all we have to do is really declare the industrial differences in the industry component. And it just lets us be a little less verbose as we're scripting. So all it's doing is this is the identity, this is the parent. Go look there, grab stuff. If it's in an array, replace everything here from what's above. Just stuff like that. A lot of this and a lot of the specifics of SimLang come from 1849 was mostly just JSON driven, and JSON done driven me nuts. So I made a list for Rob, and I said, here are things that I never want to do again. I never want to find the missing comma.
Yeah, I was about to say, the best way to conceive of SimLang, the thing that will get you a lot of the way there, and this is going to hurt poor Robert Zubek's soul a little bit to say it, but SimLang is kick-ass JSON. That's really the best way to understand it.
Is it actually a JSON superset? Like there are a lot like JSON is around, like JSON schema sort of like this. Like there are JSON superset languages, but this smells similar, but it's not literally that.
Technically a superset, but only barely. It shares what I would say is that like it is clearly, as Matt just said, inspired by, and so if you come at it having read JSON, it will be far more intelligible to you because it shares a lot of the structure of JSON. But at this point, it's like 8 years out of iteration from JSON, so
Yeah.
it is pretty unique. I can't say for a fact that it is a superset.
Can you walk me through sort of the life of one of these files? So it's on streaming assets. We launch Rise of Industry. What happens?
So the best way to look at this is that every single time that you see an open bracket and a closed curly bracket in a sim file, it is a class that exists in the game, and the variable names that you see, for example, ident or template or parent, these are variables that exist in those classes in the game.
So there's a C# representation of all these.
There's a C# representation exactly of all of these. And that is one of the reasons that one of the number one rules of SimLang, and one of the ones that gets Matt into the most trouble, is that every element of SimLang must be paired. It must have a name and then content. And if you ever put an uneven number of things, if it's not directly in a list, obviously, of comparable objects, SimLang will yell at you because it will be like, I'm either missing the content of this variable or the variable name, and I cannot work with it.
Sorry, so it's almost more like it's sort of like a serialization format then. So you already have C# classes.
Mm-hmm.
Yep.
Do you have a C# class for every unique thing as well? I was playing earlier, there's the tinker, there's there's the tinkers that hold oil, and then there's the oil production factory. Does that mean that you have tinkers.cs, oil production factory.cs?
No.
Or is it something else?
No.
Okay.
So we don't have specific classes for every object in the game. Every object in the game is described by the presence or absence of those components I was talking to you earlier. So the best way to think of an oil tanker in Rise of Industry is not that it is an object that exists in oil tanker.cs, but yes, that it is an entity.cs object. And because it is an oil tanker, that entity.cs object has a non-null industry component, and that has a non-null building component, and and there's also a non-null board component. So that says this is an industrial thing that is a building that is placed on the board. And then what makes it specifically not a generic industrial thing that is on the board and is a building is that the particular how those components are filled out is informed by some definition that is in a sim file somewhere. If we go here to this waste.sim file that you were looking at, the second object described here is waste admin, right? You can see ident open bracket template waste admin parent admin base waste close bracket. This is going to be deserialized out so that it will fill an entity class in the game. But the thing that makes it a waste admin specifically is everything that is in here. You can see every unique thing about the waste admin is here, and it is determined by how these variables are filled. So you can find in the building class under lock name, there is a localization string there that basically says waste admin. When you open it in game, this is the name it's going to have. So it's extremely modular. This is the kind of like magic of Simlang for us in terms of our workflow, is that unless I am kicking off a new feature that is like non-UI, it's like core and systemic, I don't necessarily need to interact with Matt for weeks on end. Because Matt has access to this fully functional language of his own where he can create completely new content without ever opening Unity if he wants to.
Well, that will be a mistake, because if I don't open Unity and I spent the past 6 hours scripting, prepare for a sea of errors.
Right, but presumably, and it is completely independent of that. And what makes it really nice also in terms of content creation is that it's entirely text based. So we don't have very many issues like I've heard of on other teams where designers have to lock down specific objects that they're working on, for example, and if they accidentally work on the same object, the resulting error is a huge nightmare. For us, if Matt decides that he wants to go in and change the name of waste admins, and at the same time I am changing the building component in code and thus need to go and, for example, change the name of the ribbon image variable, something minor like that. That will give us probably a merge conflict, but it will be extremely intelligible, like really, really basic stuff, like not troublesome at all. It just makes us extremely agile and unlikely to step on each other's toes. It is. Yeah, I am a massive fan of Simlang. I did not create it, but I'm like, now it's number one, like tender. I'm the person who keeps it alive, and I treat it with reverence because it is basically, more than anything, the core function around which all of our other processes orbit is that we have this Simlang, and everything else kind of depends upon that.
Yeah. I guess the other thing is that you can't do actual, you can't author logic in Simlang as far as I've scrolled around and seen, or can you?
You cannot. That is the limitation.
Yeah.
So anything that would require brand new logic, a brand new way for the system to work, that would require Matt to go over and tap me on the shoulder. And a lot of the time, what we do to get around that.
That's because that's the simulation itself is not authored in Simlang. It is authored somewhere else, and Simlang is like a sort of an input to be like, this is how you behave when the simulation is running, but it's not itself describing the interaction.
Correct.
Yes, and you'll see a lot of times with our the best example of this is you'll see grants.sim, requirements.sim, and there's another one that is now completely slipping my mind. One of the ways that we kind of try to account for this is there is a ton of little method packets. I don't even know how to describe them, where we just set up I think we have 100 grants in the game that describe basically the action of making something happen in the game instantaneously. And they all have names, and I hand them over to Matt. So that a lot of the time, yes, if you want something completely novel, he will need to tap me on the shoulder. But say he is working on a new quest, and that quest needs to give the player $1,000 when they succeed at the quest. That is, functionality, and I don't. There's not a direct quest that I've designed that does that, but he has done that somewhere else, or something similar to that somewhere else. So he can just go find that grant and place it in the right reference place for that, and basically just copy over that behavior without having to necessarily interface with the programmer at all.
Yeah, and it also helps, like, when at some point in the last year of development, I decided I wanted a waste pollution system in the game. Like, it's the 80s, it's industry. There should be waste, there should be pollution. I want pollution. I also didn't like that a lot of the complexes and things that you were building were sort of fire and forget. Like, you could build them and then never have to go and after them once they were working. Like, I wanted a reason for players to go back and have to clean things up, move things around, deal with their factors on an ongoing basis. So I designed a waste system, which is, we were looking at the waste admin. That's what brought this to mind. And in order to then include that in all the existing buildings, we just had a byproduct waste component that we just flipped into each entity that needed it, and then it just worked. So yeah, it's given us a lot of flexibility to be able to develop new pieces of logic and then put them in as needed. And again, since a lot of them are parented, I could just put all of the metallurgy industry produces waste like this. It goes in one parent class, and then all the buildings below inherit it. So it's just been a nice way of being able to implement what are pretty significant changes to the game's logic and simulation system pretty fast. I think the waste system, once I had the logic, it was in the game in an hour and a half, 2 hours. It really didn't take very long. The values were all bullshit, but I got the system in.
The best analog I would give is that this is our replacement for tooling. We barely have any tooling in the game. I mean, I've done some tooling for the art team because they interface with Unity a lot, but barring that, in terms of design tooling, in terms of code that I have written specifically for Matt to be able to create content, I can think of very little occasions that has come up.
Yeah. I guess it's sort of just speaking to the benefit of separating the concerns, right? It's the data and the simulation don't need to be intertwined together, and they're to the point where they can be almost fully separate, and you sort of choose on the actual C# side how you interpret this, but the data itself doesn't need to be defined there, or need to be sort of type safe, but they're different things. I think often people put them on top of each other only to realize later if I actually abstract this and separate my data, there's a really good quote that I totally forget what it is now, but it's something along the lines of, if you show me your data, I can tell you what your program is like. Which I'm paraphrasing, but it's something along those lines, right? And I think that for a lot of people in games, they'll be like, what data? What are you talking about? People in games do not think about data. It's part of the reason I'm doing this podcast. But I think, you're hitting the nail on the head. It's these are separate concerns, and how we author our data actually gives us an ability to describe and operate on that data in a way that is unique to our game, but also that things aren't so coupled where, Matt, you're describing doing the waste system, right? It's you can just sort of do that. You can kind of add something new and kind of probably a relatively light overhead on code. Probably have to do some UI, but it's you're not
definitely,
you're not doing all the other stuff just in C# where all the data and the behavior is all kind of intermixed with that.
Yeah, this is, that quote, I think I'm stealing that. That's 100% true for us.
I gotta find the real quote. If you look it up, it's something like that. But I was looking at some other things in the game. I see there's a lot of places where you do, it looks like sort of an icon font. You have text, and then there are icons to represent objects inside of the text. I was wondering, how are you authoring that? Is that something from Simling itself? Just how you put a string in? How does that stuff work?
It's mostly just Text Mesh Pro. We just have a font. We just have a font atlas, and then it's one of the things that we did all for Project High Rise, to be able to put icons in line in text, and it's one of the things that's carried through. So it's basically just a Text Mesh Pro sprite sheet under the hood. We just refer to the name.
Is that string authored in Simling though?
No, the string is not authored in Simling. So those strings are so it's a mixture of Text Mesh Pro font atlases, and then what you'll see is a lot of these open bracket, close bracket. Those are just tokens that we parse for localization. So those are tokens that can be replaced dynamically in code.
Gotcha. So are the strings hard coded for the text fields then, like inside the UI that you're showing, or like where are they actually coming from?
No, we shouldn't have any hard coded strings in UI. Because then we can just send a flat file out for localization, and then once it comes back, just plug it in and it just works.
The damning secret of the engineering team is that we do have some hard coded strings in UI, but it is only
news.
If a string is just an image. If it is just an icon, then we will sometimes hard code it for ease of use. Although honestly, if Robert Zubek had his way, we wouldn't even do that. But he's no longer here.
I mean, if the art team had their way, you wouldn't do it either, because they like to change icons.
Is there this is another one that I saw. So there's a pretty robust tutorial at the start of the game. Tutorials are notoriously like impossibly annoying to program. I'm wondering, Gabriel's laughing. It looks like he's already.
You said you said the T word. You got to go from some sort of ritual
I
to
know.
cleanse the room now.
No, it's just.
I wonder if you want to talk to me about like how you guys did the tutorial.
Painfully.
Painfully.
Yeah.
I want you to hear.
I want to extend the like show me your data, and I'll tell you about your code. To also like tell me about how you did your tutorial, and I'll tell you about your code.
Well, all those really nice things that we said about how extensible our game is, and how really
Symlinks
Symlang saves us from any design quandaries. That is 0% true in the tutorial. That is so the answer is we're very clever and extremely, extremely careful everywhere else, but our tutorial is a hard-coded list of instructions in order.
I love it. That's great.
Yeah. I mean, how many different times did we do a tutorial for Rise of Industry 2?
We've had 4 iterations. We've had 4 complete rebuilds from scratch.
It's also hard because it's like having made a game like this, right? It's like the game changes, and it changes in very fundamental ways that you have to like sort of account for in how like the tutorial works.
Yeah.
And it can be very difficult.
And the thing about the tutorial that ends up being true every time, because this is also true in COG, we inherited kind of the same tutorial structure from COG. The truth is, like, Symlang helps us, and we could everywhere else just reuse as much of our methods as possible, as much of our logic as possible.
Mm-hmm.
But in the tutorial, every single step is unique logic. Like theoretically, it'd be very easy for me to build a quote unquote Symlang compatible tutorial builder. But it would not save us any time, because basically every step that Matt tried to write would require bespoke logic and would require me. So it would end up essentially just duplicating the logic on the code end, the logic on the scripting end. Everywhere else that is not true. But on tutorial, it is just 100% true that every step is so bespoke that there is no way to like abstract it out to our data. Unfortunately.
And this has the added benefit of, on the last version of this tutorial, I just told Gabriel, I don't want to do this anymore. You do it. So I made him do most of it.
That is true. Matt stopped designing the tutorial at one point and just said, "Your problem now."
I mean, I just went full table flip, and I was like, "You try." And to his credit, his try was much better than any of my previous tries were.
Yeah, I think it's like we really talk about this a lot, but like as far as I can like intuit about how Rise of Industry 2 sort of like works in terms of a simulation, is that there's like I was actually very interested to see that you guys sort of have like production ticks. I thought it was kind of an interesting thing. I haven't really seen that before. I didn't play Rise of Industry 1, so maybe that was in there too. But I thought that was kind of compelling because it seems like you sort of have like the simulation system itself is basically waiting for a tick, and then it will sort of produce, and then it will like propagate somehow. Like I don't know how the actual propagation happens, if that just happens on a tick as well. And some things like you measure how long like oil takes to go down a road by like a tick. But that is all sort of like very antithetical. It notably like sort of very hands off from a player's perspective in terms of how the simulation actually works, such that work is very separate from the type of sort of sequential, staged authoring stuff that a tutorial requires. I think that's just like a different kind of game, right? So I imagine it was probably very hard to be, okay, now do a tutorial. And you're like, do what? Like, it's like a separate game. Like I didn't push it too hard, but there are obvious places where you could sort of break the tutorial. Like I accidentally build something in like the wrong place kind of before dialogue was closed. And then, it's very hard to determine some of that stuff, or like, you get sort of lazy and start letting people not rotate things and still place them. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think there are two things there. One like up a level on like the production beats and things like that. That's something that goes all the way back to High Rise. Like Project High Rise also had the daily production beats. They just weren't so directly mapped onto an actual production. City of Gangsters was turn-based, so
Yeah.
we just did it on turns. But like in Rise of Industry, we came back and it was sort of the same thing as High Rise, where like every day certain things would happen, or every N days certain things would happen. So like, in High Rise, every N days your office pay rent, or every N days, if it's a weekday, it's a restaurant that's closed, housekeeping visits, hotel rooms, stuff like that. And then there's the separate part of like tutorials going off the rails.
Well,
It's very hard to
fingers crossed, there's not many ways to break the tutorial anymore. But actually, one of the things we struggled with very much early on, to your point, is demanding sequential exact actions from a player is really just not what our system is built to do. And additionally, it's also not what is expected of the genre. So our early versions of the tutorial, we had to play cop, essentially, where we had to build so much infrastructure to prevent the player from doing things wrong, so that they could only perform a sequence of actions in a predetermined order. And that was a nightmare. It made the game unusable, and it made it incredibly fragile. The harder we tried to clamp down, the more the tutorial seemed to rebel. And so actually, under the hood, our modern tutorial avoids this problem by being functionally under the hood a bunch of quests. It is just our quest system, which is to say, it queries the state of the game and gives you the go-ahead if the state of the game is correct in one very specific way. Which is to say, if you build things in the wrong order or in the wrong places in our tutorial, the game won't stop you and it won't explode. You just won't progress. And we have allowed you to have access to all of the tools required to restore the correct state. So the way we've made the tutorial robust is actually by making it very sandboxy, in the sense that we're basically just saying, like, instead of being like, you must do these things, we're saying, please do these things. And until you do these things, we're not letting you move forward. And so you can fuck around as much as you want, but eventually there will be a goalpost that says there must be roads in these grid positions before I let you pass.
I mean, you mentioned roads. I have a list of questions. This is actually one of the next things I wanted to know, which was like, maybe this has to do a little bit actually with like the production stuff too, and sort of like propagating. Like, how do you think about roads and from the simulations perspective? Is it just like, I assume we don't literally transfer stuff with like an bounding box of a 3D model touches the building, right? Like, what does that sort of like mean from the simulation point when two things are connected by road?
Literally is just a connection. It means that this complex is connected to this complex.
Right.
And it can then contain, then it can, and if they're connected, like that's like sort of the first check. Like if you're establishing a delivery or looking to see if construction is viable, or like a bunch of other checks, like the first thing it does is like, is there a valid road point connection, a valid power line, a valid water pipe connection between these, or conveyor, like whatever the mode of conveyance is, are they connected? Like it's an establishment of a network.
So they are just simple graphs under the hood. So every time you build a road, the game marks the layer that road is on. So our grid is layered. So every position of the grid actually has it has 11 layers, and every kind of network is resigned to its own layer. And the reason we do this is because anytime that one of those layers is modified for any reason, if the road layer is modified for any reason, we then tell our graph representation of the road system, you're dirty. And then as soon as the game has a free tick, it will then look at the game board and extrapolate from grid positions back to a simple, clean graph under the hood. And this allows us to do really simple like A-star graph,
Yeah.
like pathing. But sometimes it also allows us to cheat. There's some times where it's like, well, we don't really have the frame time to be calculating a path for 200 chucks that were spawned just now to be the visual for moving the coal from complex A to complex B. So sometimes we will like store a path, and then on the actual tick, if nothing is changed, to save some time, we won't recalculate it. We'll just ask the graph, hey, is complex A and complex B attached to you? Are they both present in this graph? If that is the case, then go ahead. And then once the model has to get updated for whatever reason, then we will be forced to recalculate the actual path because we use it for visuals. But a lot of times just having the simple graph under the hood means if we haven't done work on it lately, we can just assume that objects that are in the graph are connected.
Gotcha. So does distance matter?
No.
We played around with
No,
distance mattering, and we played around with traffic as well.
I think it
and
makes for a worse game, personally, yeah.
Our initial vision for it systematically was just that it would just become a weighted graph, but we didn't like how it felt gameplay-wise, so we ditched it.
I had for Cantata when I did supply lines originally, it was they fell off like at a distance, and then it just like it also just produces like really like belligerent or like delinquent player behavior where they just build stuff really close. And it's like, well, I don't really want that.
Yeah.
And then I added like buffer ranges around buildings that you can't build these super close, and then it's just like, why am I? And then so I was like, distance doesn't matter.
Yeah, we kind of played around design-wise with forcing distance to matter without it mattering explicitly in the way that, okay, if you connect something by road, the roads are cheap, but the deliveries are expensive. If you connect something by conveyor, the conveyors are expensive, but the deliveries are cheap. So in this way,
amortize it. So it's like
you kind of force players to think about space because they're going to build really long roads and really short conveyors without ever actually making space relevant.
Yeah.
I mean, we had played about like, maybe long deliveries cost more money, having things close impacts like road quality or something like that. And in the end, it was just like, the hell are we going to surface that? And
also, do players in a game with 400 roads spawned in before you even build anything a lot of the time, do players want to go hunt down individual road tiles that are shutting down?
Yeah.
Probably not.
It's sort of a question related to this. This is a thing that I had a hard time cracking in Cantata. But basically, like for a long time, there were supply lines, not dissimilar from what you guys do, where you could have something could output something and connect it to something else, and that would, get those resources. But I sort of like ran into this issue about like production and consumption and how that actually relates to like a player's mental model of the game, especially on like triangle shapes. Or like, something produces and it connects to, A produces and connects to B, B produces and connects to C, C produces and connects to A, maybe through a much bigger graph, right? And then so like from a player's perspective, right, if I'm starting at point A, because that was the first one I built, right, like, do I have enough resources to actually produce to B if I don't have it when I'm checking my state? Like, does it actually work? And so I'm wondering how you guys like handle that, if at all, because it was like a huge thing for me to be like, I don't even remember how I solved it before I basically got rid of that system. But it was sort of like, it was just a pain in the ass to be like, how do these things actually connect? How do I think about production versus consumption and like effectively requirements? I don't know what you guys do there, how you sort of solved it in your simulation.
I don't know if we solved it. What we sort of do is we kind of give the player like a global overview of like how much coal are you making or receiving via contract and how much coal are you using. And then we'll show you the places that you actually use it and produce it and where it comes from. And then we give you a delta number at the end. And it's sort of like, is it positive? You're probably doing okay. If it's negative, you might be a little screwed. Did something break down? Like, was there a fire at your coal mine? Yeah. How screwed are you because of that fire at your coal mine? I don't know. How screwed are you, player? So originally the game didn't had things that produced at different days. Like there was the coal mine would produce 10 coal every 4 days. The steel mill would need 4 steel every day and 2 coke, and it would produce every 3 days. And then the coke factory, which was needed at the steel mill, took coal and at different rates and different times. And then at some point And I like, as a designer, I initially liked that idea, and then I saw it in practice and like talked it out, and I was like, what if everything was just a day?
Yeah. Well, because then you get these, like, this is such a hard problem that, like, it exists in Anno 1800, where, like, the production chains in there often fail to account for how much you're getting from supply lines, like trade between islands, such that, like, if you are really indexing on trade, as you should be, it's actually
Yeah.
very hard to understand in that game, like, what your actual, like, are you in the red or the black? And it seems like it's not intractable, but it's like, it's very hard to sort of give a player an accurate, like, accounting of, like, how much do
Yep.
you have right now? How much do you expect to have? And I can imagine with, like, if you're producing on a 5-day cycle, right? It's like, well, on 2 days you're going to be -5, and on 2 days you're going to be +5 because your coal that you produce was consumed 3 days. Like it's a very
Yeah.
weird thing to think about.
Sorry, I was going to say from like a system standpoint, like I think you are right that this is a hard problem in the sense that it is. I don't think this is an. I mean, perhaps I'm wrong, but this is one of those problems that transcends programming logic. This is like a real logistics problem in
It's
real
just like
life.
a-
This is like a real thing. I don't know. My father worked at a port for a while, and I've spoken to him at length about how that was because we were working on ports as a system in the game. And this is just a real thing that happens that they struggle with. But for the purposes of like making the game not feel completely like a black box that is miserable, the answer is A, it was a nightmare, but B, there are different tiers of production in Res of Industry 2. Things are produced at different phases. So we actually make, for every tick, we do several passes over everything that would presumably produce at that hour. And then we look first for things that produce utilities, then for things that produce non-utility pumpables, so gas, oil.
I think anything in the conveyors at that point too.
Yes, I think maybe things in conveyors, and then we look for higher order things. And the reason we did this was basically you failing one delivery because complex B went before complex A, but complex B depends on complex A's production. When everything is on a tick of 1 day, that is a temporary nightmare that will only continue to reoccur if you have some sort of offset, right? If you are producing less than you need. If you are producing as much as you need, that'll happen once during setup, and then it will stop happening. However, that happening when it's your electricity bill randomly shutting down buildings for no reason that you can't track, that was a nightmare that players could not sustain. Players would really lose their minds about that. And I say players, we would lose our minds about that. I mean,
Yes.
Matt has many times sent me a save file being like, my factories are shutting down in different sectors randomly due to electricity outages. And this was our way to amortize that. But the truth is, it still happens. We still sometimes get save files from players being like, why did complex B shut down randomly, which caused like this rolling shutter of shutdowns? And like the best I can say is like, your electricity probably failed at some point, and then once electricity fails, specifically once electricity production fails, everything downstream of that is not in an obvious order. It is not necessarily in order of placement. It is also not necessarily in order of primacy, and it is also not necessarily in order of the production chain. So the failures that are higher up don't spiral and are fine, but failures at that base level of utilities do tend to cause cascades where the behavior is not clear. And that sucks, but also there's only so much we can really do.
It's super hard. I think, like, I feel like what I ended up doing in like Cantata was we had it where you would only produce from what you had in storage, and we didn't account for income as a production constraint. So like someone would produce and give you 2 of X, but that was only if they had enough already in storage to do that to production. So it was sort of like multi-stepped. And then we did the same thing too, where we had like producers would sort of all produce first, and then consumers would, but yeah, I mean, I could dig out. Anna was like, I think City Skylines has this issue too, where it's like one thing goes down and everything just cascades, and you're like, this one thing it lost power for a second, and now I'm like,
like 4 days ago,
$200,000 in debt.
That's the really
I had
fun
one.
one where you lose power for. And this happens in Rise of Industry 2 sometimes, and it's desirable behavior, but it is fun sometimes to be like, oh, I lost power for 2 days a week ago, and now I'm getting contract failures. I forgot about the power loss, but now my contracts are failing because now the numbers are all off.
Yeah. I had one last question for you guys, and it was specifically about in the production manual. In the production manual Rise of Industry for the listener, it's sort of like an index of like everything that you can make in the game. And one thing that is really cool about this that I'd never really seen before is that each sort of individual item has a commiserate supply chain, you can call it, sort of like display and graph that itself is interactive. And so you can like, you need to make plastic. You can see that you need to make coal. If you click coal, it takes you to a thing and it like shows you these like really nice little visual graphs about like what you need to produce to make something. I'm wondering how you made those, not from like the UI perspective, but like how is the data coming into those? I guess, are they data driven or are they hand created?
Ooh, there'd be too much content in the game to make those handcrafted.
Yeah.
No, they're entirely coming from the sim files. So like if I create a new factory that has new technology to unlock it, that has new resources to create it, and those resources are created from new or existing resources, all of that will update sort of, it'll just occur by itself. Like it will pick up the new productions, create the graphs, it will create the dependency back to the technology. It will tell you in which complexes it can be built based on the sim files. So the production manual really is kind of like a visual representation of the unity of the sim files.
Yeah,
How did
and making it work in the back end was expensive from a efficiency standpoint, but not difficult from an engineering standpoint. It's actually fairly simple. Once you get into a loading screen, the game already has knowledge of every possible building that can exist, and that's already stored somewhere. So we just do I wish I could say I did something more clever than this, but really, we just do a giant loop through every single kind of object in the game and ask them, what do you make? What do you need? And then we store those away, and then we go through every kind of resource in the game, and using that first list, go and see and be like, okay, now we have this like building to resource information. Using that, can we cross-index like, okay, what buildings produce me and what buildings consume me in the reverse? And we just like invert that first list. And then those are not lists; those are giant dictionaries that whenever you get into the production manual, you're basically just like indexing a key, being like, hi, my building name is this. What did your giant scrape of all the game data at the start of load, what did it say I make, and what did it say I consume?
That's not to say that it was easy to actually build. I mean, the production manual was one of those things that came out of my desire not to have a tech tree, but to still have technologies that unlock things. It's very much an emergent piece of UI that emerged from many, many discussions, fights, conflicts.
Yeah, but the graph itself was not a hard part of it. The hard part of it was the 18 iterations before we liked how it looked, and how it felt.
Like the graph is like, this sounds bad. It like looks weirdly good for the rest compared to the rest of the game. Like I was like, this seems like the layout is like incredibly smart. It looks good. It accounts for multiple items and different things. And I was like, there's either a lot of like procedural UI logic that's like building this, which maybe is where you guys landed, or like you did it all by hand. Is it? So I guess there's just a lot of procedural layout logic.
There's a lot of, yeah.
Yeah. I mean, it looks amazing. I was like, this is one of the best procedural tech trees I've ever seen. Because like I think like even like Oxygen Not Included has one of these and it looks like garbage. Like that game sold, more copies than God. But like if you look at the tech tree in that game, it looks terrible. And I'm like, that's what I expect like a procedural tech tree to look like. But I saw this one and I was like, ooh, this is nice.
The production manual is my pride and joy. It is.
It looks great. I mean, you did a great job. I really thought I was like, I understand you could build this procedurally, but these look so good that I'm like, did they just lay these out? So yeah, well kudos.
Thank you.
Yeah, it is one of those UIs that the quality is born of fighting. That UI, we knew
That's
we needed
every
to
UI,
get it
I know
right.
what you're talking about. Yeah.
For people to understand the video game, two UIs needed to be as close to perfect as we could get it: the build ribbon and the production manual. Otherwise, players got lost. And so the production manual, we were talking about how, I don't remember what we were talking about. We were talking about something else that had 4 iterations. The production manual, I said 18 as a joke, but if I actually count them in my head, I think it has had at least 7 complete full iteration rebuilds where we threw away what we had and started from scratch because we knew it had to be just right or players would be confused.
The build menu actually works just like the production manual in terms of like its organization, its flow, like what goes in what complex. Like it'll show you.
I mean, the build menu, to be
previews.
clear, I understand how that one works. That one looks like what I expect a procedural UI to look like. It's some lines. It's like, I'm like, okay, I get it. But this one, I was like, this looks markedly better than that. I was like, and with the fact that it's like you account for like multiple items, but also like have special rendering for single items. I was like, this is like, it's good. I was like, this is really good.
I'm glad to hear that. I've lost more than 4 months of my life to that.
Yeah, so. I mean, preaching the choir. Oh, actually, I have one more thing. I saw some mention of Lisp in the project. Are you using a Lisp anywhere? I saw like CS Lisp, and there's something called core.lisp and queries inside inside streaming assets.
There are certain bits of legacy that when you have as your co-founder somebody who got a PhD in AI at a certain time of his life, just can't help himself with sometimes.
I have to defend Rob's honor. It is not all vestigial.
Correct.
We have a Lisp-like language that we use for our social organization.
What do you mean by social organization?
Like all of our social graphs. So generating people, what kinds of traits can they have? Like,
I see.
Like someone can't be mean and kind, and also like how they meet people.
Yeah.
All of that stuff is handled by kind of a Lisp-like sat solver that I believe it's quite like Lisp, but it was built by a friend of the studio, so I don't actually know entirely what goes on in that. And we also use it for some settings validation. So
sure.
Yeah, we use some of it for, again, sat solving of has Matt built any buildings that are technically impossible? If so, has he written something in Simlang that isn't a compiler error, but will lead to the few kinds of combinations of buildings that are actually degenerate? That is also handled by a Lisp tool.
Yeah.
Those are all of our parse Simlang, I guess.
No, we parse to C# and then hand over.
Yeah.
Okay. Gotcha.
We did the same. If you go back and read some of our papers, when I mentioned Prologue before in City of Gangsters and then Project Iris, it does the same thing where the same friend of the studio, Ian Horswell at Northwestern, had written a Prologue to C# Unity tool for one of his classes, and it sort of stuck with me about like if you have a game with a giant social graph like an entire city in the 1920s, you could use that to do some interesting things with the social simulation and connections and things like that. And so then I went and asked him about it, and he said, I haven't touched that in a really long time. Let me go see if that'll actually still work. And he brought it back to life for us, and that's in City of Gangsters. That's what drives the underlying social simulation. And who knows who, and your reputation, and your interactions with the crime families and things like that.
You'll not want us to for that discussion, but if you one day want to return to SomaSim for this podcast, get Ian Horswell and Rob Zubek on the horn to talk about specifically the city generation in City of Gangsters. It is basically a game unto its own. It is fascinating.
That sounds awesome.
It's really cool. It's also gorgeous to look at when we're doing that generation. And I know next to nothing about it, so I cannot help you.
I'll put that on my to-do list for game data. I do think there's this programming language that's coming out called Q. That's like a sort of a logic programming language that I've been really interested in. I feel like there is a lot of applicability to games with some of this stuff that is like less esoteric than it seems. And so I'm sort of interested in that evolving. Like people use a lot of these things for just like schema validation, but I think you could do a lot more interesting stuff with it. So I'm excited to see where that goes. That's basically all I got. Any last things you want to talk about at Rise of Industry 2? Anything you want to plug? And any sort of stuff right here near the end?
No, I mean, Rise of Industry 2 is out on PC now. We just passed cert on Xbox, which was an ordeal in and of itself, but it is done. PlayStation was easy. It's been done for a long time. So we'll be coming to consoles, to PlayStation and Xbox in the very near future. I don't have a date yet because we just passed cert yesterday for Xbox. So we'll be figuring that out soon. So yeah, that's basically what I want to mention.
Outside of console support, we also have a couple of goodies coming down the pipeline, a couple of bigger content patch stuff that's really exciting personally. So keep an eye out for that.
Great. Yeah. And I guess SomaSim games are on Steam. You're on the internet. People can buy all your stuff.
Correct. High-Rise is everywhere. It's on Steam. It's on Switch. It's on PlayStation. It's on Xbox. It's on
iOS.
City of Gangsters is on Steam. Rise of Industry is on Steam for now, but it will be on consoles very soon.
Yeah, by console, we are saying Xbox and PlayStation, no Switch 2, unfortunately.
Is that just like, how do you do control in that? Is it like you're using Unity like input mapping stuff? Or,
yeah.
Yeah, just all that.
Well, controller support for a simulation game is very difficult. And we use a combo of Unity systems with a lot of hacks to make it feel good.
I guess everybody does. Yeah.
Yeah.
Where can people find you guys individually online if they want to look you up?
It's best to find me by email. I try to, for the sake of my feral anxiety, not engage much on social media. So I'm kind of invisible, and Gabriel is fairly invisible as well.
You could not have found two more offline people in terms of social media.
That's great.
I don't have any public handles.
That's great. Good for you. Cool. So people can't find you online is the answer.
Yeah, I mean at SomaSim Games on X or whatever we're calling it now is there. For myriad of reasons, I'm not there we're not there very much to check the corporate account either. We're very active on all of the Discords for our various games, especially ROI2. So if you found the ROI2 Discord, we're there all the time, and I'm happy to take DMs and talk to people on Discord.
Yes, that's a good point. Yeah. Yes, that is the easiest way to contact either of us, is actually via Discord, and you can find our Discords via our game Discords. Those are public and available.
Cool.
Not the future I was promised, but it's the future we've got.
Well, Gabriel and Matt, thank you both so much for being on Game Data. Good luck with the continued release of Rise of Industry 2. And
thank you. This was fun.
Yeah,
thanks for having us.
Talk to you guys again soon. Yeah, bye. Thank you.